Well, here we are again, part 2 of my July sessions. And if you notice, I've been wearing turquoise a lot this summer. I love the water, I love swimming, and it makes me think of the sea. It makes me think of the Caribbean. I've been on 13 or 14 cruises now, most of them in the Caribbean. A couple of them weren't, but I love that water and those colors. So I wear the colors that remind me of the sea. But I thought on this episode today that I would go back to the beginning. I've been hopping all over the map. We've been to Tucumcari. We've been all over Kansas City, California. We've been everywhere. So I thought, well, it's time that I take you back to the beginning, which was in Albany, Georgia. That's how they say it down there. Now, if you're a Yankee up in New York, it's Albany, but down south, it's Albany. And the night I was born, there was a beautiful, big full moon out there. And it had a total eclipse that night, which my mother wanted to watch. I did too. I was kicking, trying to get out like crazy. My grandmother kept saying, "We need to get you to the hospital." She said, "Not until I've seen this whole eclipse." Well, that takes a while for that sun and moon to have their eclipsing going on. So anyway, and that's why, another reason why the title of my book is Blame It on the Full Moon. Because all the weird, wacko, crazy, unusual, unexpected things that happened in my life, we always would say, well, it's that full moon. You were born under that full moon, so something has to be going on. So I came into the world October 28th, 1939, which a lot of things happened in that year. I put some of them in the first of my book, but probably the worst thing and biggest thing was Hitler decided to march on Poland and what have you, and World War II began. So it was a pretty interesting year. Also sharing my birthday of October 28th are a cousin of mine. His mother and my mother were very close. Now, we're different years, but both October 28th. And Bill Gates. He got the money year of it. I didn't. But anyway, Bill Gates and Edith Head, the famous dress designer. And there are probably others, but I met Edith Head in person, and I've read, of course, about Bill Gates. So I know that they are October 28th people, too. So we are Scorpios, and that always makes life challenging. And I lived in Albany with my grandmother and grandfather and parents for a short time before we moved to Atlanta. So then we came up here, and my father was working here in Atlanta. And for some reason, I don't know why, we ended up going down to Tampa. He was stationed at MacDill base down there, the military base. And so the things that I remember, well, my first memories are really from there, from Tampa. There was a daycare center that I was enrolled in. And I remember the swings looked like animals, like circus animals. So you were riding in the lion, the tiger, the giraffe, whatever. And I thought that was really cool. And I was two at the time. I had my second birthday while I was there. And at Christmas, they did a little Christmas play. And the kids were going to perform in it. And I wanted to be in it. But I was a ham from early on. But they said, no, she's too young. We can't let her. She wouldn't be able to know the lines or anything. So I am sidelined instead of saying the lines. However, what they didn't know was that while they are practicing, I was memorizing everybody's part. And when it came the night of this little Christmas pageant, if somebody forgot their line, I jumped up and said it. Or sometimes I got up and said it along with them. And they were totally amazed, because I was 2 years and 2 months old at that point, that I had learned all of the lines of this play just from observing. And I know my father, when I was about 4 months old, he would start holding me on his lap when he read the newspaper at night. He'd come home from work, mix his highball. Back in those days, the 30s, 40s, men drank their highballs, and he would read the paper out loud to me. Now, I wasn't learning to read, but I was hearing the words, and I don't know what I was getting off of that, but anyway, it was, I'm sure, affecting my brain somehow. And then at age 6 months, he took my mother to an office party, and she did not know most of the people. So he's carrying me. We're walking around, and this was in Atlanta at the time. And he would introduce her, and, Kelly, this is so-and-so, and they'd say, how do you do? And after 3 or 4 times of observing this, he would walk up to somebody and start to introduce her. And I would, at 6 months, would hold out my little hand and say, how do, how do? And so I guess I started mimicking people early on and trying to copy whatever they were saying and doing. So we're in Atlanta, and my mother becomes pregnant with my sister, who was born in March of 1943. And my grandmother's taking care of me. And she and I are at the grocery, and I reach for a can of canned goods and pull down the entire section, which broke my collarbone. To this day, this bone still protrudes. I'm not going to show you, but it's there. You can feel it. And she, being a good old country farm woman, took me home and put a mustard post-it on it and let it be at that, and didn't even tell my mother till much later. So I was already getting into trouble. And I don't know, they say a cat has 9 lives. I don't know if people are supposed to have 9 lives or not either. But I was well on the way to using mine up by the time I was a couple of years old. While we were in Tampa, I loved water even then. And Mother was about 8 months pregnant with my sister, and she and my father, we'd gone to the beach. And my father loved to swim, and he's out in the ocean, and Mother can't swim at 8.5 months pregnant. But I was a daddy's girl, and I see him going in the water, and I go running after him. But the waves are out there, and the currents are out there, and I was not that big. I was only 2 years old, and my poor pregnant mother is trying to run and catch me before I run in and drown. And then another time while we were still there, that day school wasn't too far from Tampa Bay, that little daycare. And for some reason, we were walking along the water, and I go running over toward the wall, and Mother's like, oh no, she's going to jump in, and I can't save her. And some man was sitting there fishing, and he heard her hollering at me, and he grabbed me just before I got to the water's edge. So I was already working up on using my lives. And then when my sister was only 6 weeks old, my father got transferred to New Orleans. He had... he was a commissioned officer in the U.S. Public Health Service, and they had an office out there. So we got sent to New Orleans, and the things I remember about that are sort of scattered, but I remember every night at 9 o'clock, the sirens would wail and blow, and we knew when we heard those sirens, it was lights out. We had blackouts, so the lights had to go out, the shades down, the curtains drawn, because the German subs were right off of the coast. And I was sharing this story with a friend a couple of days ago, and she said, oh, my uncle told me that they did that in New Jersey too. And a lot of people don't realize the German subs were very close to our shores, all over the East Coast and the Gulf. And one of the things I do remember, I had stepped on a piece of tin. It was sort of a corkscrew piece of tin, which worked its way up in my foot, and it was hurting me, but it had gotten in there before they saw it to realize. So Daddy took me to the hospital, and they were going to operate and see what was in there. And a German sub had come close enough to New Orleans. They had blown up a ship that had a lot of women and children on it. And they had brought them all into the hospitals. Well, in 1942, you didn't have great big hospitals and lots of rooms and beds and all. And I can remember seeing people lying on blankets and cots in the hallways where they had to put them somewhere since there wasn't enough room in individual rooms. And the other interesting thing, so there's another little trouble I got into. And then I was out playing one day, and a little ground rattler bit me. And I go into the house. We're in New Orleans out by Lake Pontchartrain. There are only 3 houses out there, 2 of us sort of side by side and one across the field, and a convent of nuns. I think it was the Ursulines. So it's sort of deserted. And there were rattlesnakes around, and this little ground rattler either I stepped on him or he just decided to take a strike. So I go in telling Mommy, a stick made a noise and then bit me. Well, she knew, of course, what would make a noise and look like a stick. So she calls the doctor, panicking that this snake bite's going to kill me. The doctor gets there and looks at my sister, who's about 2 months old at that point, and says, "Never mind her," that being me with the rattlesnake bite, "this child is dying." And Mother's like, "Oh my God, what do you mean this child is dying?" And it turned out when Mother was in the hospital at Emory University, the Emory Hospital, they lost my mother for 24 hours. They put her in a new wing. Nobody went to see her. She's just had this baby and all. She can't get out of bed. And a janitor found her. He was cleaning up and said, "Honey, what are you doing back here by yourself?" And she said, "I don't know. They put me here and I haven't had anything to eat or anything." So during that time, they put my sister on a formula. I don't know why they didn't go looking for my mother, but they gave her a formula, and then they told Mother just to keep the formula and give it to her to supplement her milk because she was breastfeeding. Well, with the trauma of what went on in the hospital, the trauma of a move with a 6-week-old baby and a 2.5-year-old troublemaker, and going to a strange city where she had no support group, didn't know anybody, didn't have doctors or anything. And my father was traveling. He was not always there. And so she didn't have much milk, but she didn't know that. So she thinks Betsy's getting fed. And then when Betsy would keep crying, she would feed her some of this formula, and Betsy would spit it up. So the doctor hears about this, and he said, "Well, she's dying. She's not getting any nourishment." And he was a tall Prussian, Dr. Neff. He was a stern, gray-haired person. He gets the phone and he calls the pharmacy and barks some order. He looked at the formula and he said, "You should never have given her that. That's way too strong for her. That's why she spits it up. And you don't have enough milk, so she's starving to death." And my poor mother's frantic at this point. So he calls and barks out some orders, and boy, within a very short time, the drugstore had a correct formula there for my mother. And then the other thing, and people might find this interesting if there are any young nursing mothers watching this, he said, if you would drink a beer about half an hour before you feed her, that will help you relax, and then you'll have more milk for her. And Mother said, "But won't the beer hurt her?" He said, "Well, it might make her a little sleepy, but that would be good. Then both of you could get some sleep." So here I've been bitten by a rattlesnake. I've stepped on a corkscrew of tin, and I'm working my way on going through my allotment of lives quickly. I loved to eat soap. In those days, some of you who are 70s, 80s, 90s may remember that if you said a naughty word or something you shouldn't, they'll say, "I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap." And sometimes they did. Well, I love the taste of soap, so that was no threat to me. But Mother was on the phone, and she had been washing clothes in the bathtub. We didn't have a washer and dryer, and she had to do all the laundry in the bathtub and then hang it out to dry. So she had all these clothes in the bathtub. She goes to answer the phone. I go for the soap. So I'm trying to reach over the tub and get the soap in the soap dish, and I fall into the water and get trapped under the clothes. So I'm in there drowning in the bathtub, and Mother hears this frantic splashing as I'm trying to dig my way out from under the clothes, which was hopeless. And she comes running in and saves me at the last minute. And then another day, she heard some noise and heard me hollering for help. I had managed to climb up on the kitchen counter, and without displacing a single dish or glass, I had climbed up to the very top shelf of the cabinets and had wedged myself in there, and I couldn't get out. And she never did figure out how I managed to climb up and not knock a dish or a glass off, but there I was. And I guess the next thing that happened to me, we were only there a year, and it's a good thing we left. I may not have survived at the rate I was going, but the public health service wives would get together and form a little support group, and most of them had young children. So Mother took me and went to one of their wives' get-togethers, a little tea party, and the house had a porch with a brick wall and then a concrete ledge, and for some reason Mother sat me on that ledge because they're all out there on the porch having their tea. And the woman whose home it was had a daughter who was about 6 or 7. I was, I guess, heading toward 3. I'm about 2.5 at that time. And I don't know, Mother always said that she thought it was because the mother paid me a compliment about a sweet little girl or well-behaved or something. But this girl just walks over and goes, "Shh," and pushes me right off the porch. And I land on a concrete cement sidewalk below and split my head open in the back. And Mother said the blood was gushing everywhere. She's saying, "Somebody get me some towels. Somebody call a doctor." And the woman was standing there saying, "Oh dear, oh dear." I don't know why she did that. So I still have a knot on the back of my head from that. So I guess that, well, the other thing we survived was the rats. There were these great big wharf rats in New Orleans. Probably still are. But at that time, they were everywhere. So Mother had a playpen, and she would put my sister and me in it while she hung the clothes out to dry. And a little stray cat had shown up. And this little cat loved us, and we loved it. And it would sit right there with Betsy and me, my sister and me, and guard us. And Mother would go get some more clothes and come out, and she'd always find a dead rat, where that cat attacked any rat that tried to get near us. And one night, we heard all this commotion, and I can still remember this too. Some images are pretty vivid, even though I was pretty young. But a rat was in the garage, and the cat was after it, and my father heard the noise, and he went out. So here goes the rat around the garage, the cat following the rat, and my father following both of them with the broom trying to get the rat. And he used to tell us later that he worked with well, public health service had a lot of health issues and things to deal with back then that they don't now, but to do with pharmacies and rats and rat control and all. And he said that the druggist told him that the rats, when they would get into their storehouse, they would seem to know which bottles of vitamins or medicines, whatever, to knock off the shelf of things that would do them some good. He said it was amazing that they would pick bottles of stuff to try and make them fall off and break, and then they'd eat them. So anyway, that was New Orleans. There are other stories from that, but I'll save some of them for later. But you can see I was well on my way into trouble and whatever I could get into. And my poor mother, she said it was the worst year of her life. And I have to say it was not the best of mine either, with all the crazy things happening. The one good thing that happened, her best friend from Albany, Louise McDaniel, had a daughter about a year and a half older than I, and they came over to visit us. My grandfather and Louise's husband, they were all railroad men, so they had passes, and back then the trains went a lot of places they don't now. So they had come over and to spend a week with us, and there was a little amusement park down by Lake Pontchartrain, and so they took us, and so I see, if I was like 2.5, Penny would have been about 4, and she was like a big sister, and they put us on some rides, and she's there with her arm holding me in and all. And the man who was running the rides thought that was so cute. He told my mother and Louise, he said, "You all just go ahead and do the rides you want to do. The kids can just stay on here while you're doing your rides. They'll be okay." and everybody thought it was so cute how Penny was sort of protecting me and holding me on there. So that's the beginning of my life, and that's how the full moon got involved, and that's how I was starting my travel around the country from Albany and Tampa and Atlanta and then New Orleans, and much more to come. So it's good seeing you all again, and I will have more later. Bye.